It started with a pair of earrings. Small, silver hoops, nothing flashy, nothing she would normally wear. I found them in the passenger seat of her car, tucked between the cushions like they'd been carelessly dropped. At first, I thought they might be for me to find, like a subtle hint that she wanted a night out. Angela always loved when I noticed the little things, and I figured this was her way of saying, hey, let's shake up the routine. But when I handed them to her that evening, her reaction was off. She glanced at them, her expression freezing for just a moment before she plastered on a tight smile. Oh, those? Probably Katie's. She borrowed the car last week, remember? Katie, her best friend, her excuse for everything. I nodded, letting it slide, but as I watched her slip the earrings into her pocket, a small voice in the back of my head whispered, something's not right. Angela and I had been married for 8 years. We weren't perfect, but who is? I worked long hours at the factory, coming home tired but always happy to see her. She worked in retail management, juggling schedules and demanding customers. Our lives were busy, sometimes overwhelming, but we'd always been a team. Or so I thought. Lately, though, things felt different. She was quieter, more distant. Her late nights at work had become more frequent, and when she did come home, she'd slip into the shower without a word. I told myself it was just stress, that we were in a rough patch. But the whisper in my head refused to quiet down. The earrings weren't the only thing. There was her phone, always locked, always glued to her hand. She'd started flipping it face down on the counter, something she'd never done before. And then there were the clothes, tight dresses, low-cut tops, things she hadn't worn since our early dating days. When I commented on it, she laughed. I'm trying to feel more confident, she said. You don't mind, do you? I didn't mind. What I minded was the way she looked at herself in the mirror before she left, smiling like someone who was about to see something, or someone exciting. The moment that really set me on edge happened one Saturday afternoon. I was cleaning out the garage when her phone, left on the kitchen counter for once, buzzed. I glanced at it out of habit, and there it was, a text from a name I didn't recognize. Marcus. The message was short but loaded. Can't stop thinking about last night. My chest tightened. I knew better than to look through her phone. I'd always respected her privacy, trusted her. But this wasn't something I could ignore. I didn't touch the phone. Instead, I walked into the living room, where Angela was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her laptop. I asked her who Marcus was. She didn't miss a beat, barely glancing up as she said, oh, he's a new hire. I'm helping train him. Her tone was casual, dismissive. But something about the way she didn't meet my eyes made my stomach churn. That night, as Angela slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, the whisper in my head growing louder. She wouldn't do this to me, would she? But deep down, I already knew the answer. Something was wrong, and I was going to find out what. After that Saturday, I couldn't shake the unease that had taken root in my chest. Marcus. The name played in my head like a bad song stuck on repeat. I couldn't look at Angela without wondering if she was thinking about him, if her smiles, her touches, her words were all just part of some elaborate act. But I didn't confront her outright. Not yet. I needed to be sure. The first thing I did was look into Marcus. I waited until Angela left for work, then sat down at the computer and searched her workplace's website. There was a new hire section, and sure enough, there he was, Marcus Lowell, assistant manager. His bio was short and professional, but the photo next to it said more than words ever could. He was younger than me, probably by 5 or 6 years. Broad shoulders, sharp jawline, one of those smiles that seemed tailor-made to charm. I stared at his picture, my fists clenching on the desk. I told myself it was just a photo, that I couldn't jump to conclusions. But the whisper in my head grew louder. Angela's behavior only added fuel to the fire. Her late nights became more frequent, and when I asked about them, her excuses came faster than I could process them. Meetings, she'd say. Training sessions. Marcus is still getting the hang of things. I nodded, pretending to buy it. But every word she spoke felt like another brick in a wall she was building between us. One night, she came home wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. It was black, tight, the kind of dress you wear to turn heads. She claimed it was for a client dinner, but when I asked who the client was, she mumbled something vague and disappeared into the bathroom. The scent of perfume lingered in the air, stronger, more exotic than the one she usually wore. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed bathroom door, my chest tight with suspicion. The next morning, I decided to test her. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. I leaned against the counter, watching her. I told her I was thinking about stopping by her work later, maybe bringing her lunch. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide for just a fraction of a second before she forced a smile. "That's sweet of you," she said, "but I'm swamped today. Meetings all afternoon. Maybe another time." Her voice was steady, but her hands gave her away. They fidgeted with her mug, her nails tapping against the ceramic in a rapid, uneven rhythm. I nodded, playing along, but inside something clicked. She didn't want me there. That evening, I went through her car. I waited until she was asleep, then slipped outside with a flashlight. I told myself it was a violation of trust, that I shouldn't be doing this. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. The first thing I noticed was a receipt tucked into the center console. It was from a bar downtown, dated 2 nights ago, one of her supposed late work nights. 2 drinks, 2 entrees. My chest tightened as I folded the receipt and slid it into my pocket. The second thing I found was a pack of breath mints in the glove compartment. Angela hated mints. She always said they were too strong, preferred gum instead. I stared at the mints, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. This was real. I went back inside, my mind racing. Angela was still asleep, her breathing soft and even. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a long time. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, but the whisper in my head wouldn't stop. "She's lying to you." I turned and walked away, the weight of the truth settling on my chest. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. First, I needed proof. Then I needed a plan. I spent the next few days watching Angela closely, noticing every detail I'd once overlooked. The way she glanced at her phone, her smile fading as she typed out messages she didn't want me to see. The faint smell of cologne on her clothes when she came home late, a scent that wasn't mine. I felt like a stranger in my own life, trying to piece together the cracks in our marriage while pretending I didn't see them. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. That would give her the upper hand, let her twist the story, make excuses. No, I needed something irrefutable, something she couldn't lie her way out of. I needed to catch her in the act. The first step in my plan was subtle. Angela always left her phone lying around in the mornings while she got ready for work. It was locked, but I didn't need to unlock it. I just needed to see the notifications. One morning, as she showered, I picked it up and pressed the power button. There it was, a message from Marcus. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. It was all the confirmation I needed, but it wasn't enough. The next step was gathering tools. I ordered a GPS tracker and a small voice recorder online, both discreet and easy to use. When they arrived, I waited until Angela was out running errands and slipped the tracker under her car. The voice recorder went into her purse, tucked into a hidden pocket she rarely used. I told myself it was an invasion of privacy, that it wasn't who I was. But Angela had crossed a line first, and I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. The tracker delivered results almost immediately. On one of her supposed late work nights, Angela's car didn't go to the office. It went to a hotel downtown, the same one listed on the receipt I'd found in her car. She stayed there for 2 hours before heading home. The voice recorder was equally damning. I retrieved it after she went to bed, listening to the playback in my car with the windows rolled up. Most of it was mundane, calls with coworkers, background noise from her office. But then I heard his voice. "Marcus." He laughed softly, his tone warm, intimate. "You looked incredible tonight," he said. "I can't stop thinking about you." Angela giggled, her voice lower than usual. "Your trouble, you know that?" My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap. The evidence was piling up, but I still wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. If I played my cards too soon, she'd find a way to spin it, to manipulate me into questioning what I already knew. No, I needed to dismantle her carefully curated life piece by piece. I started with her work. Angela had always been proud of her job. She loved the status it gave her, the way people respected her at the office. I decided to see how much her reputation could withstand. Using the burner phone I'd purchased, I sent an anonymous email to her boss. It was short, to the point. Angela is engaging in inappropriate behavior with a subordinate, Marcus Lowell. Attached are photos and messages that prove their relationship. I attached a few of the most incriminating screenshots from her phone and hit send. Angela came home 2 days later, her face pale, her hands trembling as she set her bag down. "They're launching an investigation," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone sent photos to HR." I pretended to be shocked. "That's ridiculous," I said. "Who would do something like that?" She shook her head, her eyes darting around the room. "I don't know, but they're digging through my emails, my accounts, everything." Good, I thought. Let them. That night, as Angela lay awake beside me, staring at the ceiling, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. She thought she was still in control, that she could manage the fallout. But this was only the beginning. Angela was unraveling, though she'd never admit it. Her carefully polished facade, the one she wore so confidently at work, with friends, even at home, was starting to crack. She spent more time pacing the living room, less time talking to me. I could see it in the way she held her phone tighter, like it was her lifeline. I could hear it in her voice, sharper now, tinged with irritation whenever I asked a question. But I wasn't done yet. Her work was my next target. After sending the email to her boss, I decided to keep the pressure on. Using the burner phone, I composed a second email, this time to a few of her coworkers, including one of her closest office friends, Marissa. It read, "I thought you should know about Angela's behavior. She's been having an affair with Marcus, and HR is investigating. Ask her about the photos. She'll deny it, of course, but the evidence doesn't lie." I hit send and waited. Angela came home that evening in a rage. She slammed the front door behind her, her heels clicking loudly against the tile as she stormed into the kitchen. I watched from the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone. "They're turning on me," she snapped, yanking open a cabinet and pulling out a bottle of wine. Marissa, of all people, asked me if I'm sleeping with Marcus. I raised an eyebrow. "That's ridiculous," I said. "Why would she think that?" Angela glared at me, her jaw tight. "Because someone's spreading lies about me. Photos, texts, things that aren't true." Her voice cracked slightly, and I could tell she was struggling to keep her composure. I stood, walking over to her, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm sure it'll blow over," I said. "Just focus on your work." Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "That's the problem, Floyd. They're digging into everything now. Emails, meetings, expenses." Good, I thought. Let them dig. Her social circle was next. Angela had always been the center of her friend group, the one who planned brunches, organized weekends away, kept everyone connected. But her friendships, like everything else, were built on appearances. Using the burner phone, I sent an anonymous text to Katie, her closest friend. "Angela isn't who you think she is. She's been cheating on Floyd for months with a guy from work. If you don't believe me, check out these photos." I attached one of the hotel photos, careful to blur Marcus's face just enough to create plausible deniability. Katie didn't respond to the message, but Angela noticed the change almost immediately. "Katie's been distant," she said one night over dinner, her fork poking at her food. "She barely talks to me anymore." "Maybe she's busy," I said, hiding my satisfaction behind a sip of water. Angela shook her head, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "No, it's something else. I don't know what, but—" She trailed off, her shoulders slumping slightly. I didn't press. The final piece of my plan required patience. I had everything I needed: the tracker logs, the voice recordings, the photos, and now the growing trail of destruction Angela's lies were leaving behind. I met with my lawyer, Clara, to discuss the next steps. She flipped through the file I'd compiled, her expression unreadable. "This is more than enough," she said finally, closing the folder. "She won't stand a chance in court." I nodded, my jaw tight. "I don't just want to win," I said. "I want her to feel it." Clara leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. "Then you're going to love what we can do with this." Angela thought she was still in control, that she could weather the storm and come out the other side unscathed. But she didn't realize I was holding the reins now. The trap was tightening, and soon there would be no way out. Angela's confidence was gone. The woman who used to strut into a room with her head held high now moved with the hesitant shuffle of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I was holding that shoe, waiting for just the right moment to let it fall. Her work life, her social circle, even her air of superiority, it was all slipping through her fingers. But she wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. The GPS tracker pinged again on a Tuesday night. Angela had told me she was staying late at work to finalize a report for her boss. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, but as soon as she left, I opened the app on my phone. She wasn't at the office. Her car was parked at the same boutique hotel downtown, the one she and Marcus seemed to frequent. I waited, my chest tight with a mix of anger and grim satisfaction, watching the little dot on the map that represented her car. 2 hours later, it started moving again, heading back toward home. When she walked through the door, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She nodded, her smile forced. "Exhausting," she said, "but productive." Her lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired it. Almost. The next morning, I decided to escalate. I compiled all the evidence I had so far. The GPS logs, the voice recordings, the photos, and the screenshots of her messages. Using the burner phone, I sent a detailed email to Marcus's wife. I'd learned about her during one of my late-night research sessions. A stay-at-home mom with 2 kids, active on social media, completely unaware of what her husband was up to. The email was short and direct. "I thought you should know what your husband's been doing." Attached are photos and messages proving his affair with Angela, her full name. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but you deserve the truth." I attached everything and hit send. That evening, Angela was on edge. Her phone buzzed constantly, and every time she checked it, her expression tightened. At one point, she snapped at me for no reason, accusing me of leaving the dishwasher half empty. I shrugged, letting her frustration roll off me. "You seem stressed," I said. "Everything okay at work?" She glared at me, her jaw clenched. "It's fine," she said sharply. But it wasn't. The fallout came fast. Marcus's wife wasted no time confronting him. Angela called me from her car that night, her voice shaking. "Marcus's wife knows," she said, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "She sent me a message. She has photos, our photos." I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. "I don't know how she found out," she continued, her voice cracking. "But Marcus is furious. He said we need to stop seeing each other." I bit back a laugh, keeping my tone neutral. "Maybe that's for the best," I said. Angela didn't respond, her breathing uneven on the other end of the line. The next morning, she called out of work. She spent the day in bed, her phone silent, her usual air of superiority completely gone. When I walked into the bedroom to check on her, she looked up at me with hollow eyes. "I don't know what's happening," she whispered. "Everything's falling apart." I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her carefully. "Maybe," I said slowly, "it's time to come clean." Her eyes widened, her expression shifting to one of panic. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shrugged, standing and walking toward the door. "Just something to think about," I said, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Angela was beginning to see the cracks, but she still didn't understand how deep they ran. She didn't know I was the one pulling the strings. And soon, there would be nothing left for her to hold on to. Angela was spiraling, and it was almost too easy to watch. She moved through the house like a ghost, her phone rarely leaving her hand as she scrambled to hold onto the life she thought she could control. Her boss at work had called her in for a discussion about her conduct, and Marcus had stopped responding to her messages altogether. Her world was falling apart piece by piece, and she still didn't realize I was the one dismantling it. But the best was yet to come. The day after Marcus's wife confronted him, Angela came home early. She didn't greet me, didn't even look at me as she tossed her purse onto the counter and poured herself a drink. I watched from the living room, waiting for her to speak. "They suspended me," she said finally, her voice flat. I pretended to be surprised. "What? Why?" She sank onto the couch, her shoulders slumped. "HR found emails between me and Marcus. They said it's a violation of policy, that it's under review." I leaned forward, feigning concern. "That's ridiculous." They can't suspend you over some emails. She gave a bitter laugh, taking a long sip of her drink. It's not just the emails. Someone sent them photos, texts, everything. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. While Angela tried to salvage what was left of her job, I turned my attention to her social life. She had a small group of friends, Katie, Marissa, and Laura, women she'd known for years. They believed Angela was the perfect wife, the perfect career woman, someone they could admire. I decided it was time to show them the truth. Using the burner phone, I sent a group message to all three. I thought you should know what Angela's been up to. She's been cheating on Floyd for months. Here's the proof. I attached the photos of her and Marcus at the hotel, along with screenshots of their messages. The fallout was immediate. Angela's phone started buzzing nonstop as messages from her friends poured in. At first, she tried to deny everything, claiming the photos were misunderstood and the messages were fabricated. But the more she denied, the angrier her friends became. Katie called her out directly. You lied to all of us, Angela. How could you do this to Floyd? To yourself? By the end of the night, Angela's friends had cut ties. She sat in the kitchen, staring at her phone with red-rimmed eyes, the weight of her isolation sinking in. I walked in, grabbing a glass of water, and glanced at her. Rough night. She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the screen. I wasn't done yet. The next step was financial. Angela had never paid much attention to our accounts. She left all the budgeting, savings, and bills to me, trusting that I would handle it. So I did. I transferred half of our joint savings into a private account under my name, leaving just enough to cover the basics so she wouldn't notice right away. I also canceled the credit card she used for her personal expenses. It didn't take long for her to notice. A few days later, she stormed into the living room, holding her phone. Why is my card declining? She demanded, her voice sharp. I looked up from the newspaper I was pretending to read, keeping my expression neutral. Must be an issue with the bank, I said. I'll check into it tomorrow. She glared at me, her frustration boiling over, but she didn't press further. Angela was losing everything. Her job, her friends, her financial security. And the best part was, she still didn't know I was behind it. She thought she was the victim of bad luck, of circumstances beyond her control. But soon, she'd realize the truth. And when she did, it would be too late. Angela's carefully constructed life was crumbling faster than she could keep up. Her job was gone, terminated officially after the HR investigation found a clear violation of company conduct policies. Her social circle had abandoned her, and her financial independence was slipping through her fingers. But she still had no idea who was pulling the strings. I watched her unravel quietly, my own life oddly peaceful amid her chaos. The satisfaction I felt wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the control she thought she'd taken from me. But it wasn't over. Not yet. One evening, as Angela sat at the kitchen table nursing a glass of wine, she glanced up at me with a wary expression. I don't know how this all went so wrong, she said, her voice soft, almost fragile. I raised an eyebrow, setting my coffee cup down. What do you mean? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Everything's falling apart. My job, my friends, even Marcus is gone. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone even. And why do you think that is? Her eyes darted away, her fingers fidgeting with the stem of her glass. Bad luck, I guess. Or, I don't know. People turning against me for no reason. I suppressed a bitter laugh. You sure it's no reason? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged, standing and walking toward the sink. Just something to think about. The next day, I prepared for the final phase of my plan. I gathered everything, the photos, the messages, the receipts, the GPS logs, and printed them out. I compiled them into a thick envelope, adding the divorce papers on top. Angela needed to see everything laid out in black and white, to understand the depth of her betrayal and the consequences she'd brought upon herself. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter before she came home. When Angela walked in that evening, her shoulders were slumped, her steps heavy. She didn't even notice the envelope at first, too preoccupied with her phone as she scrolled through notifications that weren't coming. It wasn't until she set her purse down that she saw it. "What's this?" she asked, her voice cautious. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Open it." She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the envelope. Slowly, she picked it up and began flipping through the contents. The photos came first, her face draining of color as she stared at the images of her and Marcus at the hotel. The messages followed, her hands trembling as she read the words she'd written, the lies she'd told. When she reached the divorce papers, her knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the counter for support. Her voice was barely a whisper. You did this?" I nodded, my expression cold. "I told you, Angela. Actions have consequences." She tried to argue, to deflect, to blame me for her choices. "You ignored me," she said, her voice rising. "You were never home. You didn't care." I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare put this on me. I was here, Angela. I gave you everything. You're the one who threw it away." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Long enough," I said. For a long moment, the only sound was her shaky breathing. She stared at the papers in her hands, her tears dripping onto the pages. "I can't believe you do this," she whispered. I let out a bitter laugh. "Believe it, Angela. This is what happens when you betray the person who trusted you the most." That night, she packed a bag and left. She didn't say where she was going, and I didn't ask. The house was quiet after she walked out the door, but it wasn't the suffocating silence I'd grown used to. It was peaceful, free. Angela's departure left the house eerily quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt oppressive. It was the kind that signaled an ending, a finality I hadn't fully processed until I stood alone in the living room, staring at the door she'd walked out of. She didn't try to reach out, at least not at first. I figured she was licking her wounds, trying to salvage what little remained of her life. But the wreckage was absolute, and I had made sure of it. A week later, I received a message from Clara, my lawyer. "She's agreed to the divorce terms," Clara said, her voice laced with a professional detachment I'd come to appreciate. "No contest. You'll have the house, the savings, and the car. She's not in a position to fight." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Good. Let's get it finalized." "Floyd," she said after a pause, her tone softening, "I've seen a lot of cases like this. I just want to say, you handled this with a level of restraint most people wouldn't." I didn't respond right away. Restraint wasn't exactly the word I would have used. Angela's name started to disappear from my life, little by little. The first to go were her personal touches around the house. The floral throw pillows she insisted on, the framed photos of her smiling at events and vacations. I packed them all into boxes and dropped them off at a storage unit she'd rented. Her social media presence became quieter, too. The once curated feed of glamour shots and professional milestones was replaced with sporadic posts about starting over and cryptic messages about betrayal. I ignored them. Ava, one of Angela's former friends, reached out to me one evening. She'd always been the most level-headed of the group, and I wasn't surprised when she cut ties with Angela after everything came out. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner," she said, her voice heavy with guilt. "It's not your fault," I replied. Angela was good at hiding things. She made sure no one saw the truth until it was too late. Ava sighed. "She's a mess right now. She's trying to get people to feel sorry for her, but, well, no one's buying it." I thanked her for the update, though I didn't care much about Angela's current state. I had no interest in what came next for her. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. Angela left with nothing but the clothes she'd packed and the remnants of her once polished life. I kept the house, the savings, the car, everything she had once taken for granted. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no joy in winning a battle you never wanted to fight in the first place. But there was relief. I was free. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the methodical dismantling of Angela's life. Would I do it all over again? Probably. Some might call it petty, vindictive, even cruel. But Angela's actions had consequences, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. The quiet in the house felt different now, less like absence, more like possibility. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was looking forward to finding out. In the weeks following the finalization of the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy at first. Years of marriage to someone like Angela left marks, the kind that didn't fade overnight. But every step I took toward reclaiming my independence felt like a victory. The first thing I did was renovate the house. I painted over the walls she'd chosen, replaced the furniture she'd picked out, and got rid of anything that reminded me of her. The process was therapeutic, a way to physically erase her presence from the space we had once shared. I even converted the spare bedroom, once her home office, into a workout space. It felt like taking back territory she'd tried to claim as her own. Angela sent me an email one day, the subject line reading, "Can we talk?" I didn't open it. She had nothing to say that I wanted to hear. I moved it to the trash and went on with my day. My focus shifted toward reconnecting with the things I'd neglected during my marriage. I joined a hiking group, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. The fresh air and camaraderie reminded me that life didn't have to be as complicated as Angela had made it. I also started cooking for myself, experimenting with recipes I'd never tried before. It was something Angela had always dominated, insisting on being the one in charge of meals. Now it was my domain, and I found joy in it. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. One afternoon, as I was finishing a hike with the group, a woman named Erin struck up a conversation with me. She was outgoing, easy to talk to, with a sharp sense of humor that caught me off guard. We talked about the trail, about life, about the struggles of starting over after heartbreak. When she laughed, it wasn't the forced, performative kind of laugh Angela used to give. It was genuine, warm, the kind of sound that lingered long after the conversation ended. By the end of the hike, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I said yes. I didn't rush into anything with Erin. After everything with Angela, I needed to take my time. But every conversation, every shared laugh, every quiet moment together felt like a step toward healing. She didn't ask for details about my past, and I didn't feel the need to offer them. With her, it was about the present, about building something new, something untainted. Angela tried to reach out a few more times. A voicemail here, a message there, each one laced with apologies and half-hearted attempts to explain her actions. I ignored every one of them. Her time in my life was over. The house, once filled with tension and deceit, had become a sanctuary. I spent quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sun set, feeling the weight of the past slowly lift. I thought about Angela less and less as the weeks went on. Not because I forgave her, I didn't, but because she no longer mattered. One evening, as Erin and I sat on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine and laughing about something trivial, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I was happy. Not the fleeting, conditional happiness I'd grown used to with Angela, but a steady, grounded contentment that felt real. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. And as Erin leaned her head on my shoulder, her laughter echoing through the room, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. Months turned into a year, and the life I'd built in Angela's absence began to feel natural, effortless. The house was no longer a reminder of betrayal, but a symbol of resilience. My routines were no longer driven by tension, but by purpose. And Erin? She became a quiet constant in my life, her presence steady and grounding. One evening, as we sat on the back deck, Erin asked a question I hadn't fully prepared for. "Do you think you've forgiven her?" I paused, swirling the amber liquid in my glass as I considered my answer. Angela had left scars, there was no doubt about that. But time had dulled their sting, and the life I'd built since had taught me that moving forward wasn't about forgetting. "It's not about forgiveness," I said finally. "It's about acceptance. She made her choices, and I made mine. That's all there is to it." Erin nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Fair enough, but you're not carrying it anymore. That's what matters." I smiled at her, realizing she was right. Angela, as far as I knew, was still struggling to piece her life back together. Mutual acquaintances mentioned she'd moved to another town, taken a job far below what she once had, and was living in a small apartment by herself. I didn't feel satisfaction in hearing it, just a sense of closure. Her story was hers now, separate from mine. My days were filled with new hobbies and experiences. I traveled for the first time in years, visiting places I'd only ever seen in magazines. I took up photography, capturing moments of stillness and beauty that reminded me how far I'd come. And with Erin, every day felt like a fresh start. One evening, we hosted a small dinner party at my home. It was nothing fancy, just a few close friends, good food, and easy conversation. As I stood at the grill, flipping burgers and laughing at one of Erin's stories, I felt a deep sense of contentment wash over me. This was what life was supposed to feel like. When the last guest left and the house fell quiet, Erin and I sat on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. She turned to me, her expression serious but kind. "You're happy, aren't you?" I met her gaze, my heart steady. "Yeah," I said. "I am." Angela's betrayal had been a storm, one that ripped through everything I thought I knew. But it also cleared the way for something better. I'd rebuilt my life from the ground up, stronger and more intentional than before. And as I looked at Erin, the warmth of her smile filling the room, I knew one thing for certain. The best parts of my life were still ahead of me. What do you guys think of my story? Share in the comments what you think about the choice I made, and would you do in my situation?